Hi everyone, I'm here today to talk with Jennifer Steidley from Ferocious Ink and Tarot Disassembled. This deck is utterly fabulous. It's a wonderful resource for newcomers to tarot or experienced tarot readers. It takes a deep dive into the symbolism of tarot in a really beautiful way. The guidebook that you can get to come with it is a fabulous resource for all things tarot. It's really, really lovely. I highly, highly recommend, and I'm so excited to be able to chat with Jennifer today. So I'm just waiting for her to come on and join us, and then we can take a deep dive into this deck. Very exciting. Yeah, so I don't know. Oh, there she is. I'm just going to add here. I think we're good. There we go. Hi, Jennifer. How are you?
Good. How are you, Jules?
Good. I'm so excited to chat with you today. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
This is so exciting. I'm a huge fan of this deck. I was just doing a little intro and saying how much I appreciate this deep dive into the symbolism of tarot. It's really this guidebook and deck is such a fantastic resource, whether you're using the accompanying deck or another deck to explore all of the symbolism in tarot. It's really quite fabulous.
Thank you. That's awesome to hear. Thank you.
So I wanted to start by, yeah, first of all, thank you for joining me again. I feel so honored to have a chance to speak with so many amazing creators within the tarot community. It's really quite incredible. So how did you come to tarot in the first place? What was your journey with that like?
So I was in college in the early 90s. That probably dates me, but that's okay. And I belonged to a new age book club. It was kind of like those old school CD clubs where they'd send you like a book of the month. Like where they'd send you a CD of the month and
Yeah,
a
yeah, I used
CD or
to
PDF sent
remember
it
quite
back.
a bit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but it
yeah.
was like a new age version of that for
Oh
books.
gosh.
And 1 month they sent me a tarot deck, and I remember being like, "What is this magic?" Like, I don't know if I'd ever actually, really had much interaction or seen one before, and it
Yeah.
just instantly spoke to me. I don't remember the exact deck, but I know it was a Monty Farber and Amy Zerner created
Okay.
deck. I know they've
Yeah.
done a ton, and I don't even know if I still have the original copy, but I just remember being like, "What is this? This is really cool," and that's
Yeah.
kind of how I first got that little taste of tarot and started playing with it. But
Yeah.
back then there wasn't that sense of community around it that there is now.
Yeah.
So
It's
I kind of just did it by myself, and
yeah, I know. I hear you with that. I got my first deck. It's probably I don't know exactly how old I was, but it was in a small metaphysical shop in Calgary, Alberta, which is basically Texas North, Western Canada, and it was kind of, at that stage, metaphysical shops are kind of a one-off, and you had to kind of look for them, and it was,
right.
there's a small table of tarot cards and not a lot of selection. And I think I'd gotten a reading from a psychic and they had used a tarot deck, and so I was curious about it. And the first one that I picked up was Mystic Fairy. Barbara Moore did, I think, the writing for it. I'm not sure who the illustrator is. I feel so bad for forgetting. But that deck ended up being instrumental when my second daughter was born. She came 7 weeks early, and
Oh
I
wow.
randomly pulled out the deck, and it told me to trust my intuition and that the thing I was most afraid of wouldn't be as bad as I feared. And that
Right.
was the moment that I really felt a connection to the practice because it kind of got me through all the stress of her arriving so early and everything
Yeah.
else. And it was such a random intuitive hit, and like trusting that was so amazing. But I used to be part of those CD clubs back in the day, and I wish I'd known that there was a metaphysical version because I would have been
Right.
all over that. Oh my gosh, that's so
Right.
fabulous. Amazing. That is so, so cool. So then how did you progress from practicing tarot yourself to creating a deck? I know that you have a background as a graphic designer, which is
That's right.
so evident in beautiful art in this deck. It's just incredible. But yeah, what
Thanks.
was that journey like? What inspired you to engage in that project?
Yeah, I basically, like you said, I have a background as a graphic designer, and that's been my main career, for most of my adulthood. And which I honestly think I came to graphic design for similar reasons that I came to tarot, as far as this love of the way visual language and symbolism, kind of speaks to us on that deeper level. Because graphic design made sense to me in that sense too. Like you're creating, especially if you create a logo or something, you're creating like a symbol that speaks visually without words per se, So yes, I've always kind of been a nerd for all that kind of stuff. But I had a career as a graphic designer that was, was good, but I was an independent for many, many years, freelancing, and I had a kind of a bread and butter client, and things kind of went after about a decade with them. I kind of parted ways with them which I really think, looking back, was my spirit, because I had all these prompts of wanting to create these other things and wanting to dig into my own projects, but I was kind of like, no, I don't know how to make money with that or do that, and I feel like my guides were just like, no, you need, pushing, nudging. And so I feel like losing that client was a little bit like, okay, here, we'll help you, just shove you off the cliff and then you can figure it out. It's amazing. So I had this, free time. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. I was just going to say, it's sorry to interrupt you, but it's amazing how things that seemed so catastrophic at the time actually allow for evolution in a completely new direction that you may not have either thought of or maybe been brave enough to take on your own. It's like those little nudges that happen that take you just where you need to go. I'm so sorry for interrupting you. Please.
No, you're fine. No, yeah, but you're so right. It's like those are those moments that at the time they feel like, full on tower moments, like, oh my God, everything's falling apart. Why is this happening? And then you realize it's happening for a very specific reason. So it was this big opening of, okay, do I go find other client work, which has not been fulfilling me for the last couple of years, or do I use this time and try to dive in and start creating some of my own creations? So, and I actually did a deck before, Tarot Disassembled. That's not a tarot deck, but it's like kind of an oracle type style deck. That was kind of plant-based and things like that. So that was my first dabble. And the idea of making, because I was already collecting decks, so I feel like the idea of making a deck just spoke to me. I'm also a Virgo, so I feel like there's this sense of, I like to create art, but I also need structure. And the decks speak to me because you have to create a structure within a deck, a family of parts and a structure, possibly suits. And I don't know, that just really resonated with me. So it kind of just started unfolding.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I find for me, I like structure. I like to know kind of where I'm going, what steps need to happen. And when there's a framework like there was with tarot, I feel like in some ways, I don't know about you, but it allows my creativity to flourish because I have something that grounds me in a specific structure. So then once I'm grounded, I can allow myself to flow creatively. Whereas if I try and start without that grounding or structure, I feel a bit lost. Like I love oracle decks and they're incredible and it's so freeform because you can really create whatever you want. But I think if I were ever to create something, I would need that structure of tarot to kind of give me a few signposts along the way to structure me around. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. So then, what was the process like for this phenomenal guidebook that you have? I mean, this is such an incredible resource for tarot. Like I've always been very intrigued by the symbolism in the cards. And, when you look at the original RWS deck, I don't actually have a copy myself, but I have a lot of books that reference and I've seen the images so many times. And I love that you've picked up in this book all of the different elements that are parts of the cards. Like this book is so incredible. I love how you've structured it too, because you've got the introduction and then you've got this massive glossary of all of the reference points that you have throughout the cards, and it cross-references with which cards you can find specific symbols in. And then you go into such beautiful detail with all of the cards with keywords and astrological, planetary, and elemental associations. And then you've got the numerology and all of the symbols, and then the quick takes. Like it's such a huge piece of work. So how did you start? Like what was your approach to this this part of the process?
As far as the book specifically? And thank you for the kind words. That means the world to me. Thank you so much. The book was kind of funny because I originally was really more about the deck and the art, and then kind of as far as where this started. And then I'm like, okay, I'll have one of those guidebooks maybe that fits in the box, like it could be decent chunk, but maybe it will fit in the box. And then I just started researching and digging and going down wormholes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, no, I can't shut up. I've got way too much to say. This needs to be and it started becoming bigger, which is why it took the shape it did too. I couldn't, I'm like, I can't contain this in a small little thing. And
Yeah.
I definitely dug into, there's not like one particular book or place I found information. I tried to dig into lots of different sources. And then I also try to kind of draw my own conclusions too, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's definitely plenty of information out there as far as what they think some of the original intent of the symbols were and where those came from, from different practices and such and different mythologies. But then there's, almost modern twists you can take on some of them where there's, even though it's not from the time of the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot, it's like the other things have brought into other stories and layers into these symbols that are worth noting. So I had a great time writing it. It was kind of one of those, I'm not a writer per se, but I had a really fun time. Once I started going, I couldn't stop. And that was kind of a fun thing to just go dive into and not knowing where it was going to go or what, and I found, I actually enjoy this process of digging in,
incredible. Well, you're absolutely a writer because what you've included in here is incredible. It's so funny how, like, I took an art class in grade 11 and I got a really bad mark on, we had to look in a magazine and find a picture and then replicate it using paint. So I picked a sailboat on an ocean with a stormy sky, which of course is very easy to do because all of the colors and the textures and everything, and I got a very poor mark on it. But I poured my soul into it. And so from that point on, I've considered myself not a visual artist, right? And I like writing. I express myself through writing and photography, but I feel like sometimes we place these limitations on ourselves as though I'm not this or I'm not that. But from an outsider looking in, you are absolutely a writer. And I'm so grateful for all the insights that you provide here. I mean, it's really quite an amazing reference point. And I love this deck because it's great coming in as a more experienced reader because you can do a more in-depth exploration of some of the symbols I hadn't even thought of. Like I kind of seen them in the back of my head. It registered that, that's part of the Queen of Cups or part of the Fool card. But some of the other elements that you've picked up on are not things that I had necessarily considered. And yet, if it's someone that's coming to tarot for the first time as a new reader, it's such a great resource to be able to access all of these different meanings and symbols and everything else, right? Like it's really, it's so helpful to have all of that in one resource. Do you know what I mean? Like it's...
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Jules. I appreciate that.
It
just makes my day. I'm like, I love that. It makes me feel happy.
I always worry about, like, I'm so in awe of the creative process, like I said, with not really considering myself a visual artist. When I talk to creators who bring forth these incredible visual spectacles and decks, for lack of a better word, it always, I'm always so in awe of it, and I hope I'm not, like, fawning too much, but it's really quite amazing. And impressive to me as someone looking in from the outside in rather. So then what was your approach when it came to the deck? How did you figure out what your general aesthetic was going to be? I love that you've incorporated so many different colors in terms of the backgrounds of the cards. Like there's definitely a very elemental feel to it in terms of the colors that you've used. So how did you figure out like which cards were going to have which backgrounds, how you were going to align all the symbols? Like I know probably your graphic design experience comes into play with that. But yeah, I'd love to know what your approach was for that.
Sure. Yeah. So I definitely, as a graphic designer, like working in kind of that minimalist flat graphic style is definitely comes very natural to me. So that felt like a very natural interpretation of kind of what the idea was. But as far as like laying out each kind of pattern or, assembly of all the symbols, I would kind of gather, all the symbols that I needed to, for that particular card off to the side and then just start playing with the arrangement. And it was really interesting how some cards really felt like they fell into place where I'm like, okay, that feels good. And then others, I'm like, I just can't get these symbols to play well together, feel like they, work together. So some of them were more of a struggle and some of them really kind of came really quickly. And then as far as you were asking, like kind of the color palette, for the color palette, I definitely used the original Rider-Waite-Smith, tarot as like an inspiration or jumping off point. Because some of those colors, like the kind of orangey yellow and that light gray, those are definitely very prevalent in the original. But then I also took those kind of some that I wanted to be a nod to the original, but then I kind of tweaked that palette. Like there's that that kind of teal aqua color that's not very prevalent in the original that I used, and then like a limeish green color that's again not very, you know, it's not really part of the original, but I wanted it definitely to be vibrant. I wanted it to be, you know, I wanted it to be very poppy and very, yeah, I mean, in some ways I want it to be friendly, if that makes sense.
Yes.
You know, I mean, some people get, it's always been interesting to me, especially because I grew up in Louisiana when I was younger. I'm in Colorado now, but, you know, there's still a lot of like, people think this is the devil's work, and like that tarot is very scary. And, you know, I mean, you know, it's like we don't, I think those of us that have such a love for it want to almost just be like, it's such a beautiful, you know, self-growth tool. It's such a beautiful thing to work with. And I don't know, I think in some ways that played into my head too, of wanting it to feel less scary for anybody who's new to tarot possibly, and more, you kind of just more accessible in that sense, you know, like it's just symbols. We're just playing with symbols and colors, and it's happy, it's fun.
Exactly. I was gonna say, like, this is such a joyful exploration of tarot with the vibrant colors and just the way that you're expressing all of the symbols. Like, it really, when I think about this deck, I think about something that's playful and joyful and like a celebration of all of the different elements of tarot, which makes it really accessible for a wide range of people. And I hear you with that. Like, tarot has a lot of baggage associated with it. Like, often in movies, like you see, you know, the death card comes up in the tarot and someone's gonna die, and it's like, you know, all of this stuff. And I have an aunt who you can't even mention tarot around. She's very religious and just thinks it's the devil's work and whatever else. And like, I'm not in touch with most of my family still, so I don't have to deal with that so much. But it's so amazing to me, like, in its essential form, this is a piece of paper. It's a piece of a lovely illustrated piece of paper. It has meaning because we give it meaning. It's not like the cards are powerful in and of themselves. Like, there's power in it because we give it power. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's significant to us because we use it as a tool for our intuition, as a tool for our personal gifts, for our spiritual practice, right? But I mean, this is not scary in and of itself. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's
exactly, yeah.
And I love that this deck captures that levity and that sense of joy and that sense of exploration, right? Because that's so much tarot, and tarot really should be accessible to everyone. And so the more we can put things forward that allow people to connect with the practice on a personal level, I think the more beautiful it becomes, right? Because it's this expansive rather than this constructive, restrictive, scary thing, right? Like, it's, Oh, I just love that. So you'd mentioned that some cards were harder than others and some came really easily. So which ones did you feel the most challenged by?
It's funny because I was just chatting with somebody else about this yesterday, but for some reason the Lovers card really was a struggle for me. That one really, I don't know, I had to rework it. I couldn't get things to feel right for quite a while in that one. I don't know why, and I don't know if that says something about, like, you know, if there's some like message there about like, why am I struggling with the Lovers card? I don't know.
It's beautiful with the teal background, and I love that you've got the elements of the angel and the tree and the apple and the snake and like all of those things that are in the original. But it's it's really beautiful seeing those elements not in a traditional representation, but included in something beautiful and vibrant. And I don't know, I feel like the Lovers can be a challenging card because so often it's this focal point for relationship, as in something external to you. But I don't know, I've seen a few decks where it's the relationship that you have with yourself, like it's someone standing in front of a mirror or putting a hand up to their spiritual aspect of themselves. And I think that's so beautiful because there's so many aspects to relationship, right? It's not just something external to you, and being able to claim ownership over that can really help, I think, with that particular card, because it's one that I think a lot of people struggle with. Especially if you are single by choice or not by choice, it can be challenging, I think, sometimes, for sure. Yeah.
And I love what you said about like just your relationship with self. You know, that one can become such a huge part of that card of your self-love and kind of the relationship you have with yourself.
Yeah, and elements of choice as well, because I think that comes into play a lot as well with the Lovers, which is not something that I really understood when I first started working with tarot. But what I love about this practice is the more you dig in, the more information is available. Like, I feel like I could study this until the day I die. And there's always something new to explore, something new to understand, you know. And
Yeah.
guidebooks like this are so fantastic because every time I pick one up, whether it's a little white book and a deck or something more extensive, it helps me shift my perspective, even if it's just one card or many cards, in ways that I hadn't envisioned before, which is such an amazing process, right? Like, yeah. So were there any other cards that you found particularly challenging with the deck?
Let's see. Let me think. This one probably is more about my issues, but the Hierophant, I definitely struggled with a little bit because
Yeah.
I struggle with that card in general. Although I
Yeah.
feel like this year has opened me up to some better shifts in perspective towards that card.
Yeah.
Just kind of seeing different people's like thoughts on that it's not so much,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be about that, religious authority kind of energy, because that, I don't know, that I definitely struggle with that kind of patriarchal, I feel like when people kind of spun it where no, it could be about your own personal self rituals and your own personal practices and belief system. And I'm like, okay, that resonates with me more. So I feel like I'm opening up more to that card in general in tarot. But for a while, I've always been a little bit like, I don't like, when I get it, I'm like, I don't like this card. Why are you coming up? And then usually it comes up a lot then for me because I'm resistant.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing how tarot holds up a mirror to you, right? It's like
right.
often there's something that I'm resisting and I just don't want to deal with, or maybe I'm not as aware of, and then I pull a card and it's okay, time for me to address this, time for me to deal with this, because it's on paper and it's on the table right in front of me and I cannot avoid it anymore. But 2021 was good as the Hierophant year, and 2020 as well, just in terms of I struggled with the Emperor as well, but I found taking some time, because those were the numbers and cards of the year, it was kind of a neat journey of exploration to try and reinvent some of those perspectives, right? Because there's certain cards that can be very triggering. I know that those two in particular are big ones for a lot of people. The Tower and Death and the Devil, of course, as well. But yeah, it can be challenging. I mean, tarot can sometimes hold up that mirror in ways that are uncomfortable, or it can almost feel like it's not so much of a mirror as it's something that you're resisting or pushing back against. But then you're facing up to it over and over again when specific cards come up, right? So it's like, okay, how do you rework this? How do you make it happen? And when you're creating the deck, I would imagine that would be especially challenging because you're trying to envision something in a way that makes sense for you, right? So
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
I love that. I actually love that resistance, because it feels like that's that's the sweet spot when you feel that much resistance. There's like there's good seeds in there of like some kind of lesson and some good information that you're going to get out of it. But as long as you kind of can let go of the resistance, I tend to be very stubborn, I feel like. And it takes me a long time of being like, that was probably not meant to be for me. That was just a mistake. And I almost kind of keep pushing away until I'm like, all right, fine, I get it. I got to address it.
Yeah, 100%. So then which cards sparked the most joy for you and were the most fun to create?
I will the Fool for sure, because that's kind of where I started. I mean, just logically, because it's the beginning of that whole journey. And in general, that's always kind of been my favorite, energy in any deck usually is that Fool energy. I feel like in some ways I am a fool. Like, well, we're all fools, but in that good way. I feel like in general, I feel like at my best, I feel very innocent to the world, and in some ways, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like I'm very much, and I feel like that's a good thing that I want to hold on to, is that I feel continually shocked by all the stuff that goes on in the world. Almost like I'm 47 years old, but like almost like where I'm like still very new, but I feel like that's a good thing, because it means I still have an open heart to, no matter how much stuff I've seen that's like maybe heavy or dark, I feel like I still come back to a place of being a little naive and a little innocent, and still expecting the best out of everybody and out of the world. And at my best too, I feel like my best moments in life have been when I've really just jumped and just let go of all those kind of holding myself back, and just really been, like, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just going to jump and see. And those moments have been the most enriching. So I just love the Fool. And so creating the Fool was a joy. And, because it also kind of was the basis. I think I worked on the Fool to get my stride on what this whole deck would look like.
Yeah.
So it was that, you know, square one starting point. So definitely lots of joy from the Fool. And then I think my second favorite is definitely the Queen of Wands. And I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday where they brought up the point of they've heard a lot of creators say the Queen of Wands was a very easy, just kind of happy card to create in the deck. And I never thought about the fact that, you know, she has so much of that good creative muse energy. So in some ways, she's like a natural helper to anybody creating anything.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense she would be an easy one that people kind of, you know, creators tend to find joy in creating. And I love that perspective. I was like, I never thought of it like that. That's really awesome.
Yeah, that makes so much sense that you look at the queen archetype as the nurturer, right? And with the Queen of Wands, it's all about inspiration and fire and these ideas and this incubation of it. But there's such a supportive energy there for that creative process. That makes a lot of sense to me as well. That's really, really cool. Yeah, it's the Fool card is really special. I hear you with that. It's like I hope I never get so cynical or jaded that I lose touch with that aspect of myself, and I hope I never arrive. I hope I never get to where I feel is the end point with anything, because I always hope that there's more to discover, there's more to explore, there's new things to be found, right? Like the world is infinite and there's so much that we have yet to uncover, right, for ourselves as individuals. And it's so exciting to think that there's something new around the bend, you know, walking out into the unknown, to quote Elsa. I always think of that whenever I see the Fool card after seeing Frozen 2. That's the only thing I can think of. It's like the first thing that comes in, because it's that whole sense of like stepping outside of your comfort zone, and in some ways coming back to more of who you are, I think, through that process too, which is really powerful.
Right. That's a beautiful way to put it. I love that.
So did you work on the deck in sequence? Like, did you start with the major arcana and go all the way Fool to the world card, or did you kind of go with it, whatever inspired you at the time? Like, what was that process like?
For the most part, I started in order. Again, Virgo, probably I needed that like structure. But I kind of deviated at some point because some days I just be like, what card do I want to work on today? You know, and I kind of finally got comfortable with the process where after probably about the first 10 or so, I did an order from the major arcana. And then I started being like, well, no, let me just try, what are my suits going to look like? You know, and start playing a little bit with some of the other ones. So I definitely kind of jumped all over the place after I got my stride. So
I love that. There's probably parallels between certain cards too in the process of creating that would come up and lead into inspiration as well, I would imagine. That's really cool. Yeah. It's so interesting because I struggle with that too. Like I kind of need to do things in sequence, but then sometimes I have inspiration to do something different. So it can be, again, with that Fool energy, right? Stepping out of that structure and allowing yourself to play is really, really important. That's really, really cool. So I was referencing, I purchased the deck after the Kickstarter through Calling Corners, which is this incredible metaphysical shop in Truro, just about an hour from me. But your Kickstarter was incredibly successful. I think when I was looking it up, it was like 954% funded, which is incredible. Congratulations on that. And it was September 2021, right? When it was finished?
Yes, that's right. So almost a year ago. Yeah, which seems crazy.
Yeah, I honestly, I feel like I should still be back in 2019. Like, I'm not quite sure where the past couple of years have gone. It's been a really weird experience with the pandemic and everything else. Like, time goes by so rapidly, and yet it's slow at the same time. It's been a really kind of strange experience.
I agree. Time feels like it's really changed how it flows since the pandemic. It's definitely, I agree with that totally. It's been weird.
I can't believe we're coming up on 2023 soon, because I feel like last time I blinked, it was like 2021.
Right. Exactly.
So what was your experience of doing the Kickstarter like? Like, I've heard that it's quite a lot of work to get everything set up in the beginning and everything else. And so, but it's also very rewarding, because then you can market to a wider audience as well, because there's people that will often come to Kickstarter just to look for decks. And so if they're not part of your audience on Instagram or Facebook, then you've got that wider audience to access as well. So what was that process like for you?
It was incredible. I definitely was very nervous going into it. I had never done one before. I wasn't sure what to expect. I it was funny because I had resistance to Kickstarter
Yeah, yeah,
for a couple of years before that, because when I first heard of it, and this is not, I'm not saying this is what it is, I'm saying this is
yeah,
what my
yeah,
misperception was at first.
yeah,
I was like,
absolutely.
well, that sounds like GoFundMe for
Yeah,
your
yeah,
professional dreams. And I'm not trying to down GoFundMe either, but it just somehow it felt like you're just asking for money to do what you want.
yeah, yeah,
I don't know. I couldn't. And then I eventually started getting into backing decks on Kickstarter. I'm
yeah,
like, oh no, I understand now. If they don't make their goal, you're not being charged. So it's not, nobody's going to be charged without getting something.
yeah,
And so I'm like,
absolutely.
okay, I'm starting to understand this and I like this. This is a good
Yeah,
system. But yeah, I was very nervous going into it. I just, in my head, I was like, okay, I have my budget, which was just the bare bones budget to be able to get it produced. And all I really wanted or was focused on was, okay, I think I can get this funded in 30 days. I think I can get this funded in 30 days.
yeah.
And, but when it actually launched, yeah, it definitely is a lot of work going into it and leading up to it.
Mhm.
But it so far exceeded my expectations and blew my mind. It's still, I mean, this is almost a year later and I still sometimes am flabbergasted at how it went. I have
Yeah,
so much gratitude for it too. Yeah, it got funded within 6 hours.
oh,
Went
yeah,
way beyond my expectations. I will forever be so thankful for that process, because we talk about, like we were talking about in the beginning, about kind of putting limitations on ourselves of what we think we
yeah,
are, or what we can be or do. And I've always a little bit struggled with that, but I'm like, if
yeah,
there's anything I should walk away from with this, besides just enormous gratitude, is just, this is the biggest lesson of, don't put limitations on yourself.
yes.
Don't limit what you think the possibilities are, or how big something could be, or
Mhm.
how, what you can do with it.
Yeah,
I mean, that's definitely a lesson I'm going to try to continue with, because it blew my mind. It just did.
absolutely.
It
That's
just did.
incredible.
Yeah.
I've been the first deck that I ever backed on Kickstarter was in, I think, 2016, and it was Chris Ann's Sacred Creators Oracle,
I
and
love
that
that
was
deck.
I've been reading tarot for a really long time, for over 10 years, but um, it kind of was a stop and start kind of casual relationship for quite a while. And then in about around that time, around 2014, 2015, I had a friend in Victoria who was really into tarot, and I did a deep dive, and it was with the Wild Unknown, and I just kind of started exploring it on a really deep level. And
Right.
yeah, backing that deck and then getting to know Chrisanne's work, and then of course Light Seers and the Muse and everything else. Um, it was so amazing to kind of start that journey. And then now, I mean, Kickstarter, I have to kind of distance myself because I can do a number on your budget. There's so many talented creators and decks and everything
So
else. I'm
many
like,
good
that's a
decks.
pace myself.
Yeah.
But it is such a great resource. And I feel like for artists as well, like it allows you to know how many decks you need to have printed. You've got the resources going into it. So it's not as much of a gamble as if you're putting it on your website, just hoping people find out about it. And you can
Right.
market it a bit more and all of those things, right? So I think it's a really great resource for creators. Absolutely.
Oh, it's such a good resource. It's amazing what it can do
Mhm.
for independence, I mean, as far as your options, because it's
Yeah.
hard to get it like a publishing contract. And
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
hard if you kind of dream about what you maybe want your creation to be. And
Yeah.
like the first little deck I did, I had a small bit
Mhm.
of savings, and so I kind of just funded a very small run of it myself, but it was
Yeah.
I'm not putting it down. I still love it. It was one of my babies, but it was in like a little tuck box, and you know how,
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely now I'm like, oh, let's just ban all tuck boxes. I have plenty of decks I love that have tuck boxes. By the way,
Yeah.
I'll still buy a deck in a tuck
Oh,
box.
100%.
But
But I
you know,
agree
as soon
with
as
that.
you open it, it's frayed and it's falling apart. And so
Like,
I
this
kind of
really fits. Like
yeah,
it's solid and it's
right,
nice structure to it, and I feel like I'm less prone to do damage to the cards this way. And I also
right,
am completely inept when it comes to opening tuck boxes. I
right.
always
Me
bend the
too.
lid, and it drives me around the bend because I just think like I like everything pristine. Like I have my North Node in Virgo and I have my Saturn in Virgo, and I definitely it's organized chaos because I also have a lot of air sign placements, and so
Right.
I'm very hyper organized but untidy, so it's a bit of a hot mess. But the thing is, like when it comes to my books and my decks and like all of those things, I like them pristine, and I feel
Yeah.
like it's easier for me personally to achieve that when it's a structured book.
Right, right. Well, and as a creator, that's, you have a vision of what you want, and it probably does include some of those extra bells and whistles of having the
Yeah,
nicer packaging, and
absolutely.
but those things add on to the budget, and
Oh, it's so
most creators
pricey.
aren't in a position where they can fund those kind of things
Oh,
themselves.
absolutely. The
So
price
Kickstarter is
difference.
huge. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's a huge resource. And I'm not knocking tuck boxes. I will absolutely buy a deck with a
Me
tuck
too.
box any
Me
day of the
too.
week, and they
Yeah.
work really well. I just feel like for my own personal angst about it,
Yeah. Yeah.
it really comes into play.
Yeah.
So yeah, the other thing I wanted to ask about, this deck has two different boxes too, right? Like
Yes.
this is the sun box, which I had to get because it matches the cover of the book, of course. Has to coordinate.
Right.
Um, and there's also the moon edition, which is black, which
That's
actually
right.
also goes with the back of the book. So, you know, it works both ways. Um,
Right.
what was that process like? Like, did you have one box picked out and then you thought of the other one, or were they both in the back of your mind and you were kind of trying to decide, or like what was that process like?
So that was actually kind of funny because one of the things I did, before leading up to the Kickstarter, was I really tried to share mock-ups and share kind of
Yeah,
in progress stuff. And that became a great way to just get kind of even like a sounding board, because when when you work by yourself, you're in your own little bubble, and you're not
yeah,
getting feedback from anybody but your own brain.
yeah,
And so
absolutely.
I did a lot of that on Instagram and stuff, of sharing, kind of getting like, what do you guys think, And
Yeah.
so when it came time to do the box, I kind of was like, okay, maybe darker, maybe not. And I was kind of playing with it. And so I couldn't decide. I'm like, I'll throw it out to like Instagram and see what people think. And
Yeah.
it became such a heated divide, like split equally. Like people
Oh
were
my
like, either it was like Team Jacob, Team Edward up in there. It was like, I mean, people were so passionate about their choice, like some people were like, I can't do yellow, it gives me migraines. And some people were like, oh, I love yellow because there's not very many yellow tarot
Yeah.
boxes. But it was such an even split that I'm like, all right. And I talked to my printer. I'm like, what would it cost
Yeah.
to do two different box runs?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it was really fun actually getting to
Yeah.
offer that as a choice, because,
Oh,
people
that's
seem really
amazing.
tickled by that.
Yeah,
So,
and it's so funny because I feel like yellow in particular is very divisive. Like I love how bright
yes.
and cheerful it is, and my younger daughter hates yellow with a passion. Like she cannot handle it. Like I have a dress that's this color and she just like, yeah, she's very into, she's 13, so she's getting a feel for her own style, and she's currently bleach blonde, but we just got some purple dye, and she's getting into black eyeliner, and she's all about black and fishnet and like all of that, right? So it's
Right.
so funny because she's like, oh no, you have to get the moon box. Because I had a whole inner debate when I was looking at ordering the deck from Calling Corners,
Right.
and just in general. And I was like, okay, do I go with the sun? Do I go with the moon? What's gonna match? What's gonna, But then when I was looking at the deck, I mean, the back of the cards are also this beautiful, like I adore what you've done with the back. So that would have coordinated. But there's such a sunshine, joyful, vibrant feel to this deck that as much as I love the black and typically defer to black, I had to go with the yellow because it just
Yeah.
feels like it's got that joyful energy to it. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like that
Yeah.
levity. And yeah. So then, speaking of the backs, what was the design process like for this? And I love how you
So,
can do them either way. Like it's
uh-huh.
reflection. I just realized that. It's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, for that, I started during the process kind of really noting which symbols kind of show up in multiple places a lot in
Yeah.
in tarot, whereas some are just kind of strong symbols that have one card they really have the energy on.
Yeah.
And so I started playing with kind of pulling out, both for the box design and for the card backs, what are some of the common symbols that
Yeah.
repeat a lot throughout tarot, and
Mhm.
started playing with those and making little patterns out of them. So like on the back of the box, there's like almost like a little round mandala kind of sigil thing I made out of some of the common symbols.
Oh yeah.
And then there's a pattern on the front of the box. And then with the back of the cards, I tried to do like a little pattern, but definitely was conscious of what you're saying, like how you can't tell when it's
Yeah.
face down, which, if it's going to be a reversal or not. Because I
Yeah.
definitely prefer that in my decks in general.
Mhm.
I definitely like when I don't, it's like where it's a mystery until you flip it.
Yeah.
Let's see. Is it going to be upside down or not? It's going to be a
Yeah,
reversal.
absolutely. It's really helpful to have that. Like I find, I don't know if it's that Virgo, those Virgo placements for me, but I read all my cards upright because I just need it to be like just so. Um,
Right.
but I read the reverse meanings. Like if a card comes up and I feel like it fits more with the reverse meaning, then I'll look at that meaning. But I keep all my cards upright. But I know so many people that do read reversals and it's so handy to have it look the same on the back because there's nothing. Well, it can be frustrating if you want to read a reversal and then the card back makes it obvious that it's one way or another. Like it's nice when it's neutral like that, and you can kind of just go with it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Reversals are funny. People really have so many different takes on reversals in the tarot community.
Yeah.
I
It's
think
very
that's fascinating. I'm kind of like you though. I take the whole meaning into account.
yeah.
I don't necessarily. I'll like if it flips upside down, I'll kind of keep it there just visually
Yeah.
to be like, okay, maybe it's going to be a little more of that other energy. But
Yeah.
I definitely think because every card has both of those kind of energies in duality. And
Yeah.
so you usually can sense no matter which way it comes up, for you, if it's which one's really it's leaning towards, for you. So
Absolutely.
I agree with you on that.
No, it's great. And I don't know, one thing that I've really come to understand about tarot, I think when I started my practice, I don't know about you, I used to be really afraid of some of the more challenging cards, like the Three of Swords and the Ten of Swords and, Death card, Devil card, Power card especially. But the more I practice tarot, the more I don't see them as being just one thing. Like every card is multifaceted and has positives and negatives and strengths and weaknesses, and it's so dependent on where you're at a given day, a given year, and the current situation that you're in. And so I love that the cards have so many meanings in them that can be taken in different ways for different people. Like I said to my husband a lot, the cards, like there's 78 cards in the tarot, and I could pull any one of those cards and use it to make sense of my current experience. But when I'm asking a question about grief and loss, I end up with the Five of Cups or the Death card. Like the synchronicity of that is uncanny, right? Like it's so powerful that these little pieces of cardboard stuff, can instill so much meaning and so much purpose and be such a great tool for healing and tool for personal evolution, right? Like it's really magical how that happens. So in terms of your printing process, how did you figure out where you wanted to have the decks printed? Did you get in touch with other creators, and did you have the book printed in the same spot as the deck and the box, or was that separate? Like what was that process like?
So for the printer, I definitely had a few contacts already just from having done another deck in the past. It was interesting because early on, before I even started the Kickstarter, I had a printer reach out to me, and my representative at that printing company ended up just being an amazing resource for budgeting and for pricing and for talking through all these different types of things. And they sent me samples, and they just really impressed me. And I did use a printer out of China. Because the price point, definitely it's hard to beat some of these printers out of China, but they also had such good customer service. She held my hand every step of the way and made me feel so comfortable with just the process, and even just knowing what my options were. We could do a foil, we could do a laminate. She was just amazing to work with, and I was really thrilled with the quality and how everything turned out. So I definitely would probably use them again. I did not actually have them print the book. Mainly because in my head, I was like, okay, I've done all the artwork for the cards. That's done. So I feel comfortable launching the Kickstarter because I can show every card, pretty much. I think I had like 2 or 3 I had not finished, but I had like 70 something of the cards done. I've done lots of research, so I have my notes, and so it won't be too hard to compile the guidebook. And I thought, I'll have that month the Kickstarter's running to just leisurely write. And I just don't think I anticipated how much. There's just a lot of kind of admin, kind of maintaining of the Kickstarter and responding to questions and all that. So I didn't get much done, only a tiny bit done during that month. And then by the time I was writing, I was just really like, this is a process, and I'm digging in, I'm finding more stuff. So it worked out beautifully in the end. But I found a printer within the States that had a fairly quick turnaround time to produce. And because they were in the States, I could get them shipped to me without having to wait long shipping, these long
Yeah,
times, lag times.
absolutely.
So it worked out nicely because I could spend a couple more months of
Yeah, yeah,
writing
yeah,
while the cards were being produced in
yeah.
China, and then time it to where I got the books in hand right when I got the cards in hand. So,
Oh,
and they did a beautiful job too. The U.S. printer did an
yeah.
amazing job too on the books. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And there's definitely a synchronicity in the finish with the book and the finish of the cards too, because it's got
Yeah.
that like rose petal kind of finish to it that is so
Yeah.
lovely. And I was curious to see if you had them printed at the same time because they definitely feel very in line with each other. But that's
Right.
so amazing that you were able to find it. I would imagine that book printing would be a lot easier to find domestic to the US as opposed to cards because I've talked to many different people and I've heard different comments and things that people have made on Instagram about, wanting to source it local to the United States or wherever else, but having a really hard time just in terms of price point and availability and the amount of options that are available as well, because that can be quite restrictive in terms of
Definitely.
what you can actually have done in terms of the deck. So that's, yeah. So how did you navigate that process of figuring out, like, did you have a very clear idea in the beginning that you wanted a specific kind of finish, a specific kind of um, finger feel? Like, what was weight for the cards? Because as someone who collects decks, it sounds like you would have probably had access to many different approaches to that process. So yeah, what was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that comes pretty naturally to me since, from my
Oh,
graphic design background of just working
yeah,
with printing in general over the years. But it helped a lot having a bunch of samples, from the printer that I was working with to be able to really feel finishes and
oh,
because I need to
yeah,
be able to feel and look and
yes,
feel the weight.
yeah,
And I think I definitely kind of go on a project by project basis as far as what I
mhm,
feel like the finishes need to be. Like I wouldn't necessarily
yeah,
always do rose petal finish.
mhm,
um, it's funny because I think the rose petal finish is actually, I found it to be, nobody's been negative about it, but I found it to be really
yeah,
polarizing where some people are like, oh,
yeah,
I hate rose petal finish.
yeah,
And I get it because it's a little bit harder to shuffle. It's not
yeah,
quite as smooth as like a linen can shuffle so quickly and
yeah,
easily. But I just loved the way it felt. So I
yes.
just made
Oh my
decisions based on probably purely on what I liked.
silky and smooth. And I mean, I love all finishes for decks. Linen is amazing. The thinner cardstock that is super smooth and you can shuffle well.
Right.
But I don't know. I think like the rose petal finish is also what Carrie from Bouchette Design Shop uses for her
Yeah.
decks. And
Yeah.
there's just something so, I don't know, silky and soft and lovely about it. But I definitely have a
Right.
soft spot for the rose petal finish for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. It is
Same.
hard to
Same.
shuffle, but I don't even care because I love the way it finishes and with the matte and glossy is lovely and sometimes there's holographic elements that can come up in decks that are really lovely. But
I
there's
love
something
holographic.
so beautiful about a nice matte finish with the rose petal. Like it's lovely.
Thank you.
That's really, really cool. Yeah. And so your first deck, I didn't realize that you had made a deck previously. Is that still available?
It is actually pretty much sold out right now.
Okay.
I have considered maybe trying to do a second run of it. If I do, I think I'd probably increase the number of cards, kind of,
Yep.
maybe get a nicer box if I could.
Yeah.
It's still like it's one of those things that's still very much my baby, and I
Yes.
love it. But I feel like it's one of those, I don't know, it's always that hindsight. I'm like, I would do things differently with it. I
Yeah.
could show you a few if you'd like to just
Oh
see. It's
my
a
gosh, I
completely
was gonna
different
ask if
style.
if it's all right. Yeah, I'd love to
Yeah,
see it.
I mean, if you don't, if that's okay, and you
Oh
want
my
to see
gosh, I
something.
would love that. Yeah, that's fantastic. That was going to be my next question, but I didn't want to be too pushy about it. Yeah, it's funny. I hear you with that process. I have a master's in fine arts and theater history,
Uh-huh.
and I'm glad that I had the supervisor that I did. Like she was firm and tough but fair. So she really
Right.
kept me on track and she had really high expectations of the work that I was doing. So by the time I got my final draft in for my defense and everything else, I knew that it was in the kind of shape that I would be able to move forward and not have to do a billion revisions or whatever else because she really held me on task.
Sure.
But I haven't read it in years, and I didn't read it on purpose after I submitted it because I was so worried that I would see all the errors. Do you know what I mean? Like I was so
Right.
worried that I would go back to it and all of a sudden it would be like, oh, I should have done this differently or I should have done that differently. And it's so hard when you come back to something that is your baby and that you've invested so much blood, sweat, and tears and creative energy into,
Right.
because there is that aspect. Maybe it's again the Virgo thing where it's like you see the errors so much more easily, and so it can be a hard process to revisit something, right? Like it's hard.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. We're always our own worst critics. So it's always going to be that process of like, oh, do I even like this anymore? But
Mhm.
and it's funny because my friend Ice Cream Oracle is saying, don't forget, I have this other one that's kind of sassy.
Ooh,
Yeah, that's my other baby. I kind of pushed to the side. Not that I'm not proud of it. It's just funny how you kind of focus on, your one
love
thing at a time.
that.
But yeah, so
That's
the
great.
Botanic Whispers it's definitely a
Oh,
more kind
I
of
love
photo
it.
collagey.
Yeah.
And the idea was kind of these different plant essences that you find in essential oils.
Yeah.
And almost having like a goddess kind of woman,
Yeah.
I did all, it's one of those things that's interesting. Like if I did it again, I'd probably try to include some masculine energies in it. And I don't know if I love that I have a whole affirmation and some keywords. And it's not that I think that's bad, but I'm just, the decks I like and gravitate more towards have more full art and then
Yeah.
maybe in a book. But this was my
Yeah.
way, because again, I couldn't afford to do like a guidebook. I couldn't, when I first did my little run, that I'm like, well, this will at least give it some information.
Oh, that's
Um,
beautiful.
so thank you. So
Yeah.
yeah, so just some different kind of plant essences and kind of more the spiritual qualities of the plant
Oh,
essences. Um,
yeah. Oh,
yeah, so that's that baby. And then, do you mind if I show one that has a bad word?
oh, go for it. I've heard the Rebel deck on my wish list for
Oh yes, yes,
ages. It's
yeah.
fabulous.
I
And
love that deck.
oh my gosh, and I have this game, it's called Love Light and Go Fuck Yourself. And it's from Mood Tarot, and it was
Uh-huh.
like, yeah, and there's the Mood Oracle as well, but it's
I have
basically
that one. Yeah,
humanity,
yeah.
um, but done through a spiritual lens. And I
Right.
cannot wait to sit down and play it with my partner, potentially my kids. My girls are old enough now that, they're fine with that. Um, I am too, like there's so many worse things that they could be doing than using a curse word or two. Like for
Yeah.
me, for them to be bigoted or racist or something else is so much more offensive to me than using a bad word. We have a lot of conversations about other people can be highly offended by this, so you have to be very conscious about what you say in certain environments and everything else. But which is all to say, I'm excited to play the game with them because I think it's going to
Yeah.
be hilarious. I took a
Yeah.
sneak peek through all of the cards and I was just like, oh my gosh. But I have a friend coming to visit early next month who's part of the tarot community, and I can't wait to sit down with him and play a few rounds because I know it's just going to be hysterical. Like it's,
Right.
yeah. So yes, I would love to. That's a very
Yeah.
long-winded
Oh,
yes,
good.
please.
No. No, I absolutely agree with you. I have an 11-year-old son, and
Mhm.
I try to what I always point out to him is I'm like, notice I definitely curse a good bit, but
Yes.
I typically don't do it in anger. And I'm like, you're not going to catch me yelling, hurling obscenities at you angrily or dad, we talk very
Yeah.
respectfully and kindly, but if anything, it's usually when I'm being silly. Or
Yeah.
if I want to be like, empowering, like it's
Yeah.
like and I said, still, you need to be careful because it's not
Yeah.
appropriate coming out of your mouth that much right now. But
Yeah.
there's different ways to use words. And when you're hurling them more in a sassy, empowering way,
Mhm.
or excited or fun,
Yeah.
it's a different energy than just hurling, curse words at somebody angrily
Yeah.
or something.
I have to admit though, sometimes they do come out when I'm driving.
Yes, and that's
Actually,
actually, my son has called me out on
yeah,
that.
yeah, because like we actually have been car free now for almost 4 years, but prior to that, we were doing a full-time RV travel across North America. So we went
Uh-huh.
from being in a car constantly to not being in a car very much at all. Like we rent when we need one, and eventually we will get one. But I find I don't know if it's that I'm not doing it as regularly, but I also drive the speed limit all the time
Right.
because I've been in enough situations where I've had to stop quickly or whatever else. So that means I always have someone like that close on my tail, and it just causes a great deal of stress. So yes, there's some inopportune words that can come out in the driving process
Right.
because yeah, so it's been kind of an exercise in kids is what you don't do.
Uh-huh. That's hilarious. I had a whole conversation with my son because I did this research on why cursing can be good for you. Because there's actually
Yeah,
studies on the different things
yeah,
like
it's
stress
disease
relief
well,
and
right?
Yeah. And there was one that said people who curse a lot tend to be more creative. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And I told my son that, and he goes, so does that mean you're most creative in the car, Mom? I said, oh boy.
Oh, they're great. I mean, like, if we weren't supposed to use swear words, why are they so satisfying? It's like
Exactly.
the S's and the F's and the K. It's just like it's something so satisfying, and it is a release valve. It's almost like the hit a pressure cooker or something like that, right? Like it's that release. That's
exactly.
how I just
So I made this deck that's chakra based. So it's called Aligned as Fuck. And it's the idea of using and they're very simple affirmations meant to be empowering, but and for different chakras. So like this one says, and they're holographic. Holy shitballs! I am genuinely guided and inspired. So that's a crown chakra one. See, I'll just give you a couple. This one's a heart chakra. It says, I calm my tits and breathe in love.
I love that. That's great.
So that's another baby that again is sold out. So I am considering trying to do a reprint at some point because I have had a lot of people say they love it. It's fun, and you can pull an affirmation, and they're all meant to be empowering and positive. Yeah. But with with some good F-bombs and good.
Oh my gosh, because you need that, and it's. I think it's as someone who takes myself way too seriously so much of the time. I deal with a lot of anxiety. I deal with a lot of overthinking. It's so nice to be able to find tools that allow you to find some levity and some lightness, and I think that's where decks like that are so important because it gets you out of yourself. Do you know what I mean? It gets
Definitely.
You out of that, like, I've got to take life so seriously, and I've got to do this, and I've got to do that. Like there's a levity that comes into it that I think is really amazing and really powerful and empowering. Like you said, like swearing can be very empowering, and if it's like, it can be a lot of fun.
Definitely. I'm all for it.
Yeah. Well, I hope that you do go back and reissue both of those decks because they look incredible.
Thank you.
I think there's something really amazing. Like I know a lot of deck creators will re-release editions of the same deck, and it's basically exactly the same with a few tweaks. And then I know other creators that will go back and re-release a deck, and it's almost completely different, or if not completely different, there's significant changes the next time. And I'm always fascinated by that process. Like there's that part of me that likes things to stay the same, but then there's part of me that thrives on change. And I love looking at the evolution of a creator coming back and revisiting something and saying, you know what, I'm going to change this in this way, or I'm looking at it from a new perspective now, so I'm going to do this differently, or I'm going to flesh out the guidebook and then maybe take the keywords off or the affirmations or whatever. And it's fascinating to look at that process, to compare the two and see, where was I when I did this, 3-4 years ago versus where I am now. Not that you did it 3-4 years ago, I'm not sure when you did, but it's just interesting to look at that process, right? As a creative person and as a deck creator, to look at how that evolves.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Yeah.
That's very cool. So do you have any other projects in the works currently that you're exploring, or?
I do. So I have 2 decks. I have 2 decks that I kind of started, I think even before Tarot Disassembled. Tarot Disassembled just felt like it wanted to be made. That one poked and prodded and was just ready, I think, to come out. The other ones are, I definitely think I'll get to them. I keep circling back, but I haven't found my stride with like the art style yet. I definitely have the concept down for 2 decks. I'm not trying to be evasive. I just figure until I really get those kind of more going, I feel like I'll hold on telling you the concept. But with the Tarot Disassembled, I feel like there's kind of this push, and that's kind of still what's drawing my attention. So I had this idea that I think I'm going to pursue. I'm kind of been working on the cards to see how they feel. I'm kind of a slow creator. Like there's some of these deck artists that I love and follow that are so prolific, and they create so quickly and amazing things. And I feel like I have to mull things over. I have to let it just really germinate and, and ferment and I really have to ask a lot of questions to myself of like, is this a product I would want to use? Is it something that speaks to me? Because I don't ever want to do anything, I guess, inauthentically, where it's just like to create something else. Like I'm trying, I want it to be like a real serving a purpose. So anyway, that was a long story short, but basically I feel like I'm working on a sister deck to Tarot Disassembled. where now that I've broken out all these symbols, I feel like
Yeah.
it would be helpful to have a tarot oracle of sorts that has the individual symbols on each card,
Yeah.
that come from tarot. And because I feel like
Yeah.
I work a lot with like oracle and tarot in tandem.
Yeah.
And I know some people like to do that or use oracle
Yeah.
cards as clarifiers in a reading. And I think there could be a lot of power. And so, for example, if you have the apple card, because there's
Yeah.
apples in several cards in the tarot, and
Oh,
if you
I love
pull that
that.
card to like really clarify, maybe on a certain
Yeah.
position or on a reading, you could work
Hmm.
in tandem, or you could even work just individually doing just that symbol study.
I
So,
love that so
yeah,
much.
thank
It's
you.
incredible. And it's like I had mentioned that how much I love the glossary that you have here. And as you're speaking, I'm just thinking about all of the ways that each of these symbols can come into play juxtaposed with tarot and how powerful that is and how amazing it would be. And then, because you already have all of your common symbols put aside, you've got that structure to work from. But it's like, oh, that makes me so excited. I felt kind of nosy, like asking, like, oh, do you have future projects? Because I don't want to put
No,
any pressure on
please.
anyone. Because it's like, oh, so what's next? Come on, like it's not about that at all. And I think
No.
it's important to like give this amazing deck its due as well. Like it's always that question for me. It's like, how long do I pause to appreciate what I'm doing now before I jump into something else, right? And
Right.
I can totally relate to that percolation period. Like I'm sure my supervisor would be horrified if she knew how many of my components of my thesis were written literally like the night before the due date. Because it wasn't that I hadn't been working through the ideas, it wasn't that I hadn't been organizing them, but it was all happening up here. And
Right.
it's like I needed that incubation period before I could just kind of vomit it on the page, for lack of a better word. I mean, I would go through and meticulously edit everything and rework it, but
Sure.
I needed the deadline to push me to take all those things that were floating around in my brain, very Seven of Cups style, and like actually make them into something tangible, right? So it's
Yeah.
leaving space for that process is really important, right? Because it takes
Right.
time. But I am so excited to hear that you are even contemplating that because that is really, really cool.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I imagine it would be really interesting to see once you have one baby out in the world, for lack of a better term, one creation out in the world, what comes from that in terms of ideas and
Right.
branch out and the similarities and the differences. Like looking at, I mentioned Chris Ann earlier, the similarities and differences, like you can tell that she's created each one of her decks because there's a certain through line in terms of the feel, but they're also unique and different. Do you know what I mean? And
Definitely.
it's
Yeah.
fascinating to look at that and see how that works, right? It's
Right. I
really,
love her decks too. They
yeah,
are all so unique and
yeah.
really, but yeah, they all have their own personality, but yet they're, yeah, I adore her stuff.
Yeah, the tarot of, is it Curious Creatures, the most
Yeah,
recent one?
with the
Oh,
animal heads.
the animal
I
ones, I
love that
love
one.
it. It's so creative and
Yeah.
so amazing. That's incredible. I'm just trying to see if there had any other pressing questions that I wanted to ask. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention for anyone tuning in, where everyone can find you. I know you've got at Ferocious Ink, I think on Instagram and also Facebook.
Mhm.
And then you also have ferociousink.com, which is your main website. Do you have a newsletter associated with that, or like how can people keep up with your work best?
Probably just the social media is the best.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
have a newsletter. I don't even technically, I'm working on like a more customized website. So right now the
yeah.
Ferocious Ink actually redirects to my Etsy shop right
Oh,
now.
perfect. That's great.
Um,
Yeah,
Again,
that
I
would.
kind of tend to mull and work slow, but I'm working on getting a better kind of just more personalized website for myself. Newsletter is always something I've contemplated, but I haven't ever done. So yeah, so probably just
Yeah.
social media is the best right now to keep up with.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really, really great. Well, I'm so excited to see what you come up with in the future and maybe re-envisioning of some of the things we talked about. That's so exciting. And
Thank you.
thank you again for joining me. This is
Thank
so
you.
fabulous to be able to have a chance
Yeah,
to chat with you about all of this and
right.
explore this fabulous creation. It's I know I'm totally gushing, but I really I love what you've done with this deck. It's so magical, like this, all of the different elements that you include in each of the each of the cards. I can't speak. It's so incredible to see all of those different elements like really finely tuned and defined in this way because I feel like sometimes it can get lost in the overall image and you can kind of pick up
Right.
on some things and not others. So it's really amazing to see them kind of separated in different elements. Like I know that rose is very much a part of the death card, but it's not something that I had picked up on as much until I saw this particular card. So it's really nice to have that invitation to take a deeper dive into aspects of the cards. It's really
Thank
amazing.
you. Thank you so much, Jules. I really appreciate, and you're just amazing and lovely to talk to. So, by the way,
Oh my gosh, likewise. This is such a pleasure. Really, I look forward to Deck Creator Chat so much because it feels like such a privilege that I actually get to talk to so many amazing people within our community. Like it's funny, I was in health and wellness before COVID, and I extricated myself from that in November of 2019 because there were just so many issues associated with it. I won't go into that, but I finally came out of the tarot closet, so to speak, and set up the account and got started with it. And I was blown away by the community that I found here.
yes.
Like, every community has its issues and has its challenges and everything else, but the sense of connection and the sense of community that is built up through the various creators and practitioners within this metaphysical community, I guess, as a whole has been really incredible. Like, it's a community unlike anything I've really found before, and I'm so grateful for it. It's really quite amazing.
I so agree. It's such a warm community too. Once you get the chance to have the privilege to be a part of it, it's amazing. There's so many amazing creators. There's so many amazing readers, and it really becomes that small world feel because you start realizing it's not, you start realizing it's like literally it feels like a real community of people, even if you've never met them in person.
Absolutely.
It's so special. I get scared for Instagram's future just because I know people are getting very jaded with Instagram, rightly so. There's so many scammers. There's so much stuff going on like that.
I had switched my account to private for a little bit, and then I realized it really wasn't working because I wanted to be able to share these chats and everything else. But there's just so many scam accounts, and it just gets disheartening. And with the algorithm shifts and everything else, like I've really slowed down my pace for posting, partly because of that, partly to dealing with post-COVID fatigue and different things. But I'm really trying to figure out for myself how best to move forward, right? It gets like, I want to engage in the community. I want to participate in the community and still feel like I'm doing it in a way that feels good. And then it's like that question of, I have my website set up and I want to put more energy into my newsletter, but like there's so many hours in a day and not a lot extra. So it's like, okay, where do you focus your energy? Where do you focus your time? You don't want to lose the community, but then it feels important to set up something separate now with the way that everything is going. So it's a challenge for trying to navigate all of that.
Yeah, I agree. I'm trying to get my stride on that too, because I feel like Instagram has been, at least in the last couple of years, where I found such authentic, real connections, and which are amazing because it's like these people are my friends. I actually I love these and these connections, and I don't want to. Yeah, so it's an interesting conundrum to try to figure out kind of how to grow and where to go with it, so that you still have those.
And trying to figure out like in what capacity, like is it better through a website, through a personal service, through something like Patreon? But then there's so many Patreons out there and I want to support it all, but then, like it's juggling everything, right? But like the whole idea of keeping community going feels so important to me in whatever capacity. And so, being able to set up a monthly tarot group where everyone comes together and talks about different elements of tarot would be really fun and exciting, and doing writing on things. So it's just figuring out. I'm happy to know that I'm not the only one who's trying to navigate that right now. I think it's a common concern for a lot of people.
It is.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you again for joining me. This is an absolute pleasure. And I'm so thrilled to have the opportunity to chat with you. And I'll be saving this to my Instagram stories too for anyone who wasn't able to join us live. If you want to tune in and check out all the details of our chat. You were very generous with all of the information you shared around your publishing process and everything else, and I appreciate that. I know it's going to be helpful for other people as well. So
and just if anybody ever has more questions like who's my printer and what's resources, please reach out. I definitely always want to support other creators and share. I'm definitely not somebody who has any problem sharing information. Like, if you were like, where'd you get this or what'd you do this? Anytime, please, anybody DM me, reach out. I'm happy to. And thank you so much for inviting me. You're just amazing.
It's likewise. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.